Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so very much for joining us for our last session of our series of 8 on housing. And very delighted to have the panel of experts that we have. And just to reiterate and stress the importance of getting your questions in the chat box, if you possibly can indicate who they're for, just the first name, that would help. We're going to ask the questions at the end to the entire panel. And so for the sake of time, if we know who the question is for, that will be extremely helpful. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our very first presenter, Mr. James Hughes, and he's based in Montreal, and he's currently the CEO and president of the Old Brewery Mission, bringing experience from his previous roles, such as the J.W. McConnell Family Foundation, the Department of Social Development, Government of New Brunswick, and the Old Brewery Mission. Jim's studies included a BCom from Queen's, a Bachelor of Arts from Cambridge, and he holds a Bachelor of Civil Law in Law from McGill University. If that wasn't enough, his skill sets include nonprofits, policy analysis, public policy, public speaking, strategic planning, and more. I've known Jim for a good number of years, and he certainly is a go-getter, a mover, and very forward-thinking. His insights are invaluable. Jim, I thank you for giving us the time. I know how busy you guys are, especially with the topic and the services that you're providing, but I'm also very anxious to hear of the new programs and initiatives that you guys are undertaking, because I think that you're going in a very forward-looking direction, and it's very encouraging for someone like me in the public. So it's all yours.
Thank you for that, Ruth. That was so kind and generous. My head is, moving in this direction, and I appreciate it very much. So very touched. And yes, Ruth and I have known each other for a few moons. I would say 3 decades is probably closer to accurate than anything else. So, and great to be on a panel with all these other wonderful people to talk about a topic of such importance for our city, our province, our country. What I'm proposed to do for the next few minutes is to tell you a little bit about the Old Brewery Mission. So our organization really is an example of one that is trying to adapt to the new realities that we're facing, particularly as regards housing. And it's interesting. Some people think, well, there's homelessness here and there's housing here, and they're different. They're not. They are intimately and intricately connected. And if one is not working, in other words, such as the case today, homelessness is going up, that's because our housing sector is not working for the people that we serve. But before we get to what we're trying to do about it, if you'll indulge me, I want to go back in time. I just finished watching Ken Burns's fantastic docuseries on the Civil War. And I tell you that because the Old Brewery Mission was founded 25 years after the end of the Civil War, the American Civil War, in 1889, 25 years after the re-election of Abraham Lincoln. It's that old. And 1889 was the time, of course, of the social gospel right across North America. It was the time of saving souls and saving bodies and minds. And the Old Brewery was no exception. It was founded by 2 United Methodist leaders, Mrs. Finley and Mrs. Douglas, back in what was then the abandoned Williams Brewery. She asked, the ladies asked, we want to bring soup and sandwiches to the homeless men. Where do we go? And they were told by homeless men in the street, well, go down to the Old Brewery. That's where people hang out. And thus was born this organization, as they say, which has been serving Montreal for 135 years now. And it served for the first, I'd say 120 or 115 or so of those years, in the way that all homeless shelters served homeless people through a charitable model. So a humanitarian set of services, a bed, a meal, security, a shower, for 16 hours during the day. So from 4 o'clock in the evening, you know, those images of homeless people being lined up around the shelter buildings. Old Brewery was exactly like that. At 4 o'clock, the doors open, people came in, they got their meals, and it was only men for the first 100 years. We started serving women experiencing homelessness in 1998. People would come in for their meals, the people would then go and have their showers, people then would sleep, get up, have their breakfast, and leave, because that the expectation was you can go get a job, you can go get a home, you can go reconnect to your family. Go out and take care of yourself. But if it doesn't work out, come on back. And over the course of the period 1993, so 100 years after our founding, until 2003, during a period of, many people will remember, profound austerity across our country and across most of the developed North, homelessness went up dramatically. So Old Brewery managed 150 beds of emergency service types, these classic shelter beds, in 1993. Fast forward to 2003, we were managing 450 beds and providing the same basket of emergency services. So we actually were just accomplishing not much more than being witnesses to poverty, witnesses to distress over this period. And so the moment came, and Old Brewery was one of the early adopters of this, this thinking is that we can no longer simply manage homelessness. We have to solve it. We have to find a way to solve it, because the private sector markets, the private sector housing markets, are failing to do so. And so thus started a period that continues to this day of Old Brewery offering not only housing, not only homelessness services, by the way, on a 24/7 basis. That's one of the modern innovations. It kind of goes without saying, if you're going to solve homelessness, you need to know the people that you're actually working with. And we didn't know them before. We've turned over our whole team to become a counseling and intervention team, so we can get to know people and know ultimately what they want in terms of housing. And so we opened up a whole new sector of work. And I talked about homelessness and housing being two silos. At the Old Brewery, they're one. One leads to the other. And so we've become a housing organization. We define ourselves as offering emergency services and rehousing. Most people are being rehoused. And over the period of 2006 to 2000 and today, 24, we've increased the number of units that we manage to today, which is over 400. We have 409 units of housing that we manage in various different ways, as an owner, as a manager, or as an offerer of support services. So, and we're very agnostic on how we get our hands on housing. We just want to get our hands on them as much as we can, because the need is so great. So fast forward to COVID. Let me get you into the COVID period. We've emerged from COVID. It's funny, we're forgetting already the impact of COVID on our housing markets. Others will talk more about it, and probably have talked in previous series about the impact of COVID. In our sector, it has been profound and dramatic. And it's been profound and dramatic in terms particularly of the massive increase that we've seen in people experiencing homelessness. According to what's called the street counts, this is the best method we have for determining on any given night how many people are homeless. The number of people experiencing homelessness of all different kinds. So people living in the street, people who are living in transitional facilities without any security of tenure, people in the metros, people in the emergency wards, in the shelters. In 2018 was 3,200 people. And as of the street count in 2022, as we came out of COVID, it had gone up to 4,700 people on any given night. Minimum, those are the number of people who were actually counted as homeless. That's a 30% increase over a 4-year period, which is really dramatic, exceeded only by the increase across Quebec. So Quebec went from approximately 5,000 people who were homeless, and during the street counts, which were done in urban and some suburban areas right across the province, it's now 10,000 people. So it went up a full factor of 2 over that period. The other vector that we've seen during this period is a very increase of a significant increase in opioid use. and people suffering from mental illness. We've heard that all before. Those are very present in the past. But before COVID, Old Brewery in our emergency services, and we still today manage 480 units of emergency service spaces. We have to intervene almost once a day with drug overdoses. And pre-COVID, we almost never did. So the presence of fentanyl, laced fentanyl in the streets is very, very present. So we have an increase in the number and an increase in the complexity of the people we're dealing with. And that makes for very, very challenging times in terms of fulfilling our vocation, which is to solve homelessness and do that through housing. So that has become very, very, very difficult for those two reasons to fight it out in a housing crisis where there's so few units of the extreme affordability kind, those that are under $1,000. Even rooms we're seeing now being offered at the $700-800 per night, where they don't even have a shower or washroom in their rooming house. So it's very, very competitive. We fight for them. We have a housing team that goes out and tries to fight for those apartments to try to get our people in. But it's because of the market, landlords, and once again, others will talk more about this than I will. Landlords are basically have too much choice. And who gets left out more often than not are people with the kind of profiles that our people have, people who need support services, people who have these kinds of diagnostic profiles are often left on the side of the road, in some cases, literally. So the housing crisis has only meant that we have to be more creative than we've ever been before. And the way that we've tried to be the most creative is starting to think about what I think is the most exciting development in the whole homelessness area, which is prevention. And I want to spend a few minutes to talk to you about what prevention means in our space. So prevention in our space means that we have been successfully able to identify someone at imminent risk of homelessness and to try to divert them or broker them into housing and never have to use the services of an old brewery mission type of organization. You know, it's funny. When do you become homeless? You become homeless sometimes when you bang on the door of the old brewery. Well, what if you never do? Even though you're in trouble, even if you're vulnerable, even if you're at risk of losing your apartment, what if someone is there beside you to try to help you find an option? And so we have developed something I think is very, very exciting, very cutting edge, which is a prevention team. And we've done it through a partnership model, which is necessary because the first question you ask in prevention is, where are they coming from? Where are homeless people coming from? In the past, as an organization that was only doing emergency services for people experiencing homelessness and housing, we could wait for them to come to us. We could wait. They come to our door, they bang on the door, and now we intervene. And sometimes, boy, the process is long and hard to get people onto that trajectory out for the reasons I've discussed. But what if, before they even get there, we've identified that they are indeed at risk? So 3 or 4 areas that are generating homelessness of a particularly acute kind are, and this is according to the street count that I mentioned to you before, are 1, private sector housing evictions. So number 1 reason for homelessness, 22% of people, according to the last street count in self-reported data, said, I'm homeless because I got kicked out of my apartment. And in a minority of those cases, it's because they couldn't pay the rent, they damaged the property, they had other behavioral issues. But a majority of the cases is because of all those problems, what we've heard about, rent evictions, dem evictions, personal family exceptions, that kind of thing, that have forced people out. And remember, most people who get forced out of those situations do find housing. They're not all at risk of homelessness. But in working with organizations like Project Genesis, the Office Municipal d'Habitation, and other private sector housing organizations, we've now got a team in place to try to intervene when someone who've identified as being given a notice, we can move in and have that talk about where are you going to go. It's actually, you really only need to ask 2 questions to determine homelessness risk. 1, have you been homeless before? And 2, where would you go if you actually didn't get your apartment? If we get a yes or a no to either of those questions, we know there's a risk, and we will now wrap that person in the kind of services and supports they need to try to find an alternative. Now it's just starting. So the private sector one is it's been going on for about a year now. We also have another program going on for about a year and a half of people coming out of prisons. That's a number 2, one of the second or third issue. We're 25% of people coming out of prisons are at risk of homelessness. So discharge planning is so important for these people. So we're partnered with the YMCA, with John Howard Society, and the Elizabeth Fridas Society, who are experts in prison discharge, to try to pair our housing teams with them so that when discharge is happening, we can intervene early to try to discover a pathway into housing that they may not otherwise have. YMCA is an expert on the prison system. Oldbury's expert in housing. Together, we're finding options for people. And man, it is working. Asylum seekers is another one where this is the first time ever we've had to actually address the issue of asylum seeking, and we're trying to do it in an upstream way. People coming out of treatment facilities as well. I mentioned the opioid crisis. Most people coming out of treatment are going to find housing with the organization that they're working with, but many, their behaviors are too difficult. They need alternative types of intensive support, and that's where we're in with some treatment organizations to try to provide that kind of support. One area where we have not got into, but we really are dying to do it, is in the youth area. So 1 in 2 young people on the street has come out of child protection services, and they are needing a massive reform in how they discharge plan in those systems, and we're proposing to do that with them, hopefully over the course of the next year. Seniors is another, and this whole webinar is to some degree has a seniors vector to it. We're looking at trying to also get a team together to focus on vulnerable seniors in private housing who are particularly vulnerable in many cases. So what is prevention? Ultimately, prevention is housing. And what is housing? Housing is prevention. These are truly 2 halves of a whole. And my time's coming to an end here, so I'm really just want to say maybe just a couple more things that in terms of thinking broadly about what kind of city we want and cities we want across our country. We have to profoundly accept the changes that the housing crisis has brought about and advocate for massive densification, massive diversification, and innovative programs in affordability through rent supplements and housing allowances in a way we've never had before, because otherwise, and this is according to some statistics, homelessness will double again by 2030. Can you imagine if we can start to see the types of tent cities that we're seeing here in Montreal and elsewhere in 2030? The challenge will be almost irreversible by that time. The good news is that I mentioned there's 5,000 people tonight in Montreal who are going to be homeless. 5,000, not 50,000, not 500,000. 5,000 people you can house, but you need to invest, and governments in particular need to invest in ensuring that we have thousands of new units, that existing units are protected, tenant protections need to improve, that we think in thousands in terms of new units for this population, and not just in hundreds of units, which is the intensity of the investments that are being done now. That gap is going to get us into big trouble if we let it persist the way it is. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Delighted to continue the conversation during the chat.
Jim, thank you ever so much. I mean, quite the eye opener. I think most of us knew there were problems and issues and challenges, but I don't think, or I certainly didn't know it was to the number and the degree that it is. And I believe you're 100% right. If we don't nail it down now with the aging population and the lack of services for people with mental illness, etc., inflation, we're going to be in a real crisis. So I thank you very much for all the work you do, and I thank the good Lord that you're there to do it. And we'll no doubt have questions. So now's your time. If you have questions for Jim, get them in the chat box. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our next presenter, Jacques Beaudoin, who is the former Director of Public and Legal Affairs with Réseau Québecois, the OSBL de Habitation. And Jacques has been just recently retired, so he likes to be identified as a housing advocate that's going to continue with his interest in housing. Back in 2015, he decided to dedicate his professional activities to the promotion and support of community housing sector, the right to housing being as an essential condition for the well-being of all citizens. As part of his work with the RQOH, he was notably in charge of supporting the nonprofit organizations that provide affordable housing for seniors across the province. And I just realized that just 30 seconds of your time, I can't remember. Did I thank our funders for this particular webinar? I don't think I did.
It's always okay to thank them again.
So without further ado, I hope somebody can rejig the recording and fix it. We must thank our funder, the Secrétariat de Relations avec les Québécois d'Expression Anglaise, for the funding that has allowed us to produce these webinars. I'm sorry, Jacques, to do that to you. But when I saw Québecois, the light bulb went on. So Jacques, I'm going to turn it over to you. I thank you for doing this. This is your second visit with us. And hopefully you can give us something of what you think is moving forward in the right direction, or what we should be doing to move it forward in the right direction. So thank you.
Thank you, Ruth, and good afternoon to you all. So, well, I've been involved in the community housing sector for approximately 9 years, and I decided to left and to retire at the moment where probably the housing crisis has been worse than it has been in those 9 years. So I hope that won't be seen as a kind of a capitulation from my part, but there's a lot to do to solve the housing crisis. The good thing is that at least there's now a kind of unanimous recognition that we're facing an housing crisis. That was not the case 2 years ago, but now I think, well, anyone has to recognize the reality of that housing crisis. Our provincial minister for housing used to say, and she is not the only one to use that that expression, that we're facing a perfect storm in terms of housing, with the cost of housing rising, the increase of rents, increase of interest rates, increase of cost of construction, increase of the cost of managing non-profit or community housing organizations. We are facing also exceptionally low vacancy rates. So there's a clear shortage of supply in regards to housing. So all in all, that's a perfect storm, and that's certainly one of the reasons why we are seeing phenomena, as James spoke about, with the increase of the number of homeless people facing or experiencing homelessness. So there's clearly a problem of supply. You probably all heard in the last year, CMHC, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, making a projection that Canada will need about 3.5 million additional housing units by 2030 to restore affordability, close to 900,000 in Quebec only. But, well, the solution cannot only be to augment supply. We also need to determine what kind of supply, what kind of housing we need to meet the variety of needs among the population. If the result of trying to augment supply is only creating two-room renting household at $2,000 a month for a single mother with her kids. That won't certainly not help to solve the problem. However, well, even if the situation is very critical and we can speak of a disaster for some categories of the population, the reality of the crisis also create a situation where there are perspectives for developing housing and answer the need of the people and realizing the right to housing. First, there's a sense of emergency and a recognition also that we need a concrete coordination of efforts to be deployed at all levels, be it the federal government, the provincial governments, municipalities, and certainly our community housing sector. By community housing sector, we speak of nonprofit or co-op organization that provide housing for different categories of the population. So we need pretty much better coordination between all those organizations or governments involved. Our friends from CHRA, Canada Housing and Renewal Association, which is the Canadian association representing the social and community housing sector across the country, well, they're advocating for a Team Canada approach in regards to housing, mobilizing all the actors together to develop new solutions and a variety of solutions also. That process that I think is a need, and there's a lot of people also agreeing of that need too. That process also will have to be conducted by clear objective and a clear sense of the importance of ensuring that everyone have a place to live. I have to say that, one of the things I've been much proud of during my involvement with the RQH is that I've been involved with the process that conducted to the Canadian Parliament to adopt the Act on the National Housing Strategy in 2019, and it has been a big step forward. I think that act has been adopted that recognize housing as a human rights and that recognize and establish clearly the responsibility of the federal government to work to advance with the objective of realizing the right to adequate housing for all Canadians. And this is something we must rely on in our advocacy efforts. Not only in our advocacy efforts, but I think every action, every decision, every program, every measure to be put in place, be it by the government, federal, provincial, public administration, municipalities, or housing organizations as those involved with the RQH, all those action and decision program and measures should be guided by this objective of progressively realizing the right to adequate housing, recognizing housing as a human right. And eventually all those program and action has to be measured in relation with to this objective. So by keeping this goal in mind, it becomes obvious that we must augment, I think, the place of the nonprofit sector among the whole housing market in Quebec and Canada. And fortunately, we can rely on a very dynamic nonprofit housing sector across the country, including in Quebec. We have a strong network of community housing for seniors that offer affordable housing. We speak of 25,000 housing units across the province, including 8,500 units in private seniors residence owned and managed by nonprofits. All those organizations have absolutely no objective or need to offer a return on that investment to those big real estate investment trusts for whom housing is a commodity. Their only objective is to provide affordable housing with adapted services at the best cost possible, and to allow also the involvement of the tenants in the management of those organizations. Well, I think it's clear with the presentation made by James a few minutes ago that we also have in Quebec a very strong and irreplaceable network of community organizations such as Old Brewery Mission that provide support and provide housing too, and support in the process to going back to housing to people who have experienced or are still experiencing homelessness. Homelessness is certainly a national crisis or a national disaster, but it's a scandal that the number of homeless people has doubled between the last two street count that have been deployed in various cities across the province. But the situation would be even and spectacularly worse without the hard work of all those dedicated organizations that already exist, and that we can rely on also to continue their work and develop new initiative, new perspective for solving the homelessness crisis. Currently in Quebec, there's a fantastic network, and it's not enough known, of non-profit community housing projects. A network that is currently developing tends to the involvement of dozens of relatives of young adults living with intellectual disability or autism spectrum disorder. These young persons are finally having access to their own housing, to a place to live whose rent is fixed according to their financial capabilities, and a place that allows them to acquire their autonomy. So there's a lot of community organizations across the province that are always doing a very great work to with secure housing for all kind of people. But it has to be developed to meet the need of all those who cannot benefit from that offer of community housing. There are also some very interesting and new initiatives from nonprofits to acquire housing and apartments from the private sector and protect them from speculation or from those renovictions that have become a kind of a modus operandi or a way to make rapid profits for some investors whose reflects it is only to consider housing as a commodity and not as a human right. So you have a Solid in Châteauguay that acquired hundreds of apartments in Châteauguay, Longueuil, Verdun, in Drummondville. There's the Corporation Mainbeau recently in Pointe-aux-Trembles in Montreal that acquired 700 housing units also to protect them from speculations, and they are now non-profit, and the security of occupation will be guaranteed for the tenants. So I think governments have every interest in supporting that sector, the community housing sector, and this certainly should orient their policies and actions. That would be a very concrete manner to fulfill their commitments for progressively realizing the right to adequate housing. So, and if they go in that direction, I'm sure they will find allies in the community sector. And in the end, they will have act for the common good, which should be the goal of any government. Regarding us, before concluding, regarding housing for seniors specifically, I have to say that I think we could rely on Minister Bélanger, who is in charge of seniors in Quebec. We had the opportunity to meet her a few times in 2023. I heard them recently in an interview on CBC, French CBC Radio-Canada, where she says that according to her, the future for housing for seniors is nonprofit and community housing, and she's really open to focus on that sector to meet the need in the years to come that will be more and more important for providing different options for seniors. So I hope that her orientation will materialize, and that I hope also that it will influence also all her colleagues at the Council of Ministers in Quebec.
Thank you, Jacques. That was very, very interesting. And I found it especially interesting when you mentioned Minister Bélanger, because I'd heard the very same comment from people at CMHC when I was trying to get presenters for these series of webinars, that she seemed to be in our corner. So that's something I'm sure that Seniors Action Quebec has made note of if they didn't already know. So thank you for that presentation. Once again, get those questions for Jacques in the chat box. And now our next presenter, who's also been with Seniors Action Quebec on several occasions and helped us out. I'm delighted that he's agreed to come back, and it's Matt Delvecchio. Now, many of you may know Matt's name from his weekly show, Life Unrehearsed, on CJED every Sunday. Matt is the owner of Lianas Senior Transition Support that provides guidance to families and loved ones when they're in a life transition, elder care planning, and psychosocial assessments. And he's also certified professional consultant in aging. Matt also has a column with the suburban newspaper, Seniors and Aging, that you can follow him along with. Matt has agreed to talk to us today about what's new in private and public seniors residences and long-term care facilities. So without further ado, thank you once again, Matt, and delighted that you're able to give us some time, and I turn it right over to you.
All right, well, thank you very much, Ruth, and thank you for the invitation. I really enjoy speaking to Seniors Action Quebec. I prepared a little presentation, and Brendan's going to help me out here. There you go, Brendan. And Ruth had asked me, Matt, can you give a little talk about what's going on in both the public sector and the private sector regarding residences? So certainly my pleasure. So Brendan, if you could throw it over to the next slide. What I'm going to talk about is an update in the public sector, what's going on regarding Maison des Aînés. Then we'll move it over to what's going on in the private sector, some of the challenges they're facing, what the government is doing to try to help out. And I also want to address some of the care levels being met in both the public and the private sector. All right, Brendan. There. All right. When we refer to public residences, some of you may know it as CHSLDs or RIs, Ressources Intermédiaires. This is our public system, long-term care. Well, you and I might know it as nursing homes. Well, the concept of something called Maison des Aînés was developed right around the pandemic, post-pandemic, and it's actually a very good concept. There are quite a few residences that are being planned. There's 46 in all that have been planned. And what is a Maison des Aînés? They will be eventually replacing our traditional CHSLDs, or Centre d'Hébergement de Soins de Longue Durée. And it is actually quite good and quite proactive. We should be proud as Quebecers. We're on the forefront, at least hypothetically, in terms of what a long-term care home should look like. And for example, they're trying to adapt the care for the individual. Instead of the big box CHSLDs that we might have known in the past, try to adapt the care to the individual, try to make it as home-like as possible. And what they've done is, although there might be anywhere from 72 to 96, all the way up to 144 people living in a Maison des Aînés, they're blocked off in units of 12, and every room will have their own private bathroom, including an adapted shower, which is very, very unique, certainly from what you're used to here in Quebec, but unique in Canada as well. So conceptually, we're on the right track. As I mentioned, there were 46 that are planned. It's about 3,500 units, give or take. Results to date, even though this was announced several years ago, in typical fashion, things are cost overruns and delayed. There's only been about 17 of the 46 that are in service right now. And it has been a tremendous, costly venture as well. Believe it or not, today we're looking at an average of around $800,000 per room. That's the cost to build these things. So although it is a wonderful way or a much better way of living for the individual, and I'm all for it, it does come at a very, very steep cost. And I know there's quite a few people from the Montreal region. We still have a little ways to, or in fact, a long ways to go to get these Maisons des Aînés in Montreal. There's not many on the radar. One coming up in the West Island. One was just opened up in the East End. A second one in about 4 or 5 years. No date announced, but for the West Island Point Claire region. So we have a little ways to go. But like I say, it is certainly much better than what a typical nursing home looked like. All right, Brendan. I always get asked about waiting times in the public system. And even though we're building all these residences, the waiting times, we're going in the wrong direction. So the latest stats that I can gather, about 2,500 people were waiting for a long-term bed in a CHSLD. This was in April 2019. And as you see on the slide, we're over 4,500 people now in 4 years, almost double, 80% increase. And so I often get asked, why is that happening? If we're building more and we're spending more, the reality is we aren't keeping up with our aging population. That's the bottom line here. The population is growing faster than the investments that are being put into long-term care homes, and we've got some catching up to do. All right, Brendan. I will say, though, one of the silver linings of the pandemic, and we saw the horrors that in CHSLDs for our vulnerable seniors. Today, though, we should be proud to say that care levels are improving. Is it optimal? We have a long way still to go, but it is certainly improving. I had a guest on my show on CJAD, Life Unrehearsed, and it was actually the mayor of Westmount, Mayor Christina Smith, and she was on my show a few weeks ago talking about her father's transition, who had to be discharged from a hospital into a residence, and finally ended up going into Vigie Mont-Royal in town of Mount Royal. And some of you may remember, Vigie Mont-Royal was one of the worst hit homes during the pandemic. And so, of course, she was very nervous about this whole process. And even on air, she had explained that, Matt, I could not be more pleased with the transition, with the support from the social workers, to him now living there and being well taken care of. So I think that's a good example of the direction we're heading. I don't want to say it's perfect. As I mentioned, we have a long ways to go, and there are still some very challenging and difficult stories out there, but we're heading in the right direction. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to go into some of the newer ones. I was in Glenmount in the Côte-de-Neige area, which is an RI. Boy, oh boy, on their memory care floor, it's as if I was in Mont-Tremblant and walking the streets of old Montreal, because the designs and the paintings and the pictures and the fake trees and the fake mountain, we've really coming a long way. And a lot of that is the influence from the Netherlands as well. So I will say the care levels are improving. All right, Brendan. Now, private residence. We're going to switch gears. That's what I'm talking about so far was public. Move it into private. You might have heard the term RPAs, which indeed stands for Résidence Privée pour Aînés. There are about 1,400 of them in the province of Quebec. They range from the big, 300, 400, 500 residences that you see on the bottom left, all the way down to the smaller duplexes and homes, which are actually becoming even more trendier as it becomes a little challenging with these long waiting lists. So Résidence Privée pour Aînés is the level, I guess, above, as Jacques was talking about. We do need more of these nonprofits out there. So if Brendan, if you could switch to the next slide, the role that RPAs play is for those that want to be proactive. We may have couples that are just ready to downsize and move into a nice retirement communities. Perhaps an individual lost their spouse due to death and now they're alone at home and they may want to find a more social environment, well surrounded with activities and care and meals. So some people are doing it in a proactive manner, which is great. Others are doing it at what I call as gap fillers. Gap fillers, the waiting list for nonprofits and CHSLDs are very, very long. We need more of them. So in the meantime, the private sector is filling in that gap for people that can go into that. It is costly. And so it very often, the gap fillers will be while you are waiting to get into the public system. But as a result, the smaller residences and other residents are having to offer higher levels of care. And that's been a challenge. You know, people are staying at home as long as they possibly can, which is completely understandable. But now, if they are going to move, it's usually because they have some form of care requirements. Great, Brendan. I want to address some of the concerns about RPAs. Believe it or not, there have been over 500 closures of RPAs in the last 5 years. Just some mind-boggling statistics. And some of them we've seen in the last couple of months. King David, a very popular one in Côte Saint-Luc, Jardin Botanique in the East End. That's just in the last couple of months. Many of these 500 closures are actually smaller residences. The independent ones that I was talking to you about. Those are also a big majority of these closures. Why? Quite simply, it is very costly to run an RPA. Inflation, labor shortages, labor costs, food costs, insurance, increased regulation. There are just some RPAs that cannot keep up. And if they can't keep at full capacity, and I'll give an example of a smaller one. If you've got 10 people and all of a sudden you lose 2, you've lost 20% of your revenue. In the case of King David, with about 25 units that were empty. They have about 100 and they were operating at about 75% capacity. 25 rooms averaging at around $4,000 a room. That's $100,000 a month of lost income. Over a year, they're out $1 million. They just could not keep up. So we hear some horror stories about private investors and property management coming in and shutting down RPAs. The vast majority of closures of RPAs is simply due to the fact that it is becoming too costly for them to be successful. All right, Brenda, next slide. The government is recognizing this. Recently, the provincial government has announced some RPA allowances. They're trying to address these closures. So there was talk of Minister Sonia Bélanger. She recently announced about $200 million over 5 years going to some specific RPAs. What that is some personalized care services. Meaning if you're at RPA category 3 or 4, you're providing bathing, dressing, administering medication. There is some money for you. They are targeting those RPAs today for units that are 30 or less. That's about 650 out of the 1,400 RPAs that will soon be eligible to receive some government support to help them with their financial troubles. Brendan? Other government support. There is a tax credit for home support for seniors in private residences. It is increasing at a rate of 1% per year up until 2026. So used to be 35%. And this is, when I say 35%, this is a credit on certain services that you would be receiving in an RPA. Meals, housekeeping, care services would all be included in that. And it's going to get bumped up to 40% by 2026. Welcome support, not nearly enough. They are still far too costly for many people, but we're heading in the right direction there. And I often get asked, as you might have known, Premier Legault announced after the pandemic that the 40 or so private CHSLDs that were operating will be converted to public. That conversion is ongoing. It is a very slow process. There's probably around a dozen in the island of Montreal that will be converted to public. Just a handful, 2 or 3 have already been converted, but eventually all private CHSLDs, these aren't RPAs, CHSLDs being the nursing homes, will be converted over to public. And I think I've got one more here. Importance of advocacy. I couldn't stress it enough. I think it's going to be a common theme and why we're all here today. I'd like you to know that your voices do not go unheard. Advocate. Many of these improvements at Maison des Aînés and the RPA allowances are due to advocacy work. A lot of us are at the provincial level, but they are listening. Believe me, they are listening. There are people on this presentation at the government level that are listening to us as well. So keep fighting. I know it's not, it may seem that your advocacy work is not being heard, but it is, and we can only continue to do so.
Matt, thank you very much. Once again, you've given us a wealth of information, and not only that there's still work to be done, but also it's encouraging to hear that things are moving in the right direction. And, you know, with the drastic amount of needs and challenges, it is going to take some time. But I quite agree with you. If we stay quiet and we don't speak up, then they figure everything is okay. So thank you for that. And once again, get those questions in the chat box for Matt. So now our next presenter, longtime friend of Seniors Action Quebec, I think. Rick, you're probably the one who's done the most presentations for us, but you're so good, we have to have you back. And I think what you're going to talk about today is so very important. It's the importance of tenants exercising their rights. I think we all have encountered a senior who's received a rent increase or something has gone on with their landlord, and they're so intimidated, so fearful to exercise their rights. So Rick is going to give us some reasons why we should. A little bit about Rick. He is a lawyer and plain language specialist with Éducaloi, one of our partners, and he provides support to the Anglophone community groups across Quebec, offering legal information, not legal services, to the public. He's been a lawyer for more than 30 years. He has a wealth of experience in the community sector. He was the staff lawyer at Project Genesis, another housing advocacy group. And not only did they deal with housing, but welfare and other social rights. He served as a coordinator to the Committee to Aid Refugees. And currently, he's also the supervising lawyer at the Just Solutions Legal Clinic of the Montreal City Mission. Rick, thank you for doing this once again, and I turn it right over to you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction and for this invitation. Always a pleasure to speak to Seniors Action Quebec, especially with such distinguished panelists. So I'm very happy to be here. And as you mentioned, Ruth, the topic today is why is it important for you as a tenant to exercise your rights? And I think all of the other speakers have touched on it in one way or another. Essentially, it's prevention of homelessness. When I worked at Project Genesis, and James touched on this specifically as well, we would see people who had not contested rent increases for years and years and years and just got stuck with the increase that the landlord had asked for. And then finally, they couldn't afford it and were facing having to move and perhaps even homelessness. So I'm going to focus in the brief time that I have on rent increases, but I can touch, if there's time and people have questions about it, on renovations and renovictions later on in the question period. So just in terms of rent increases, I'm just going to go over the rules and give people some idea of how to assess whether they should accept or refuse a rent increase. So in terms of the rules, landlords can only ask for one rent increase each year. Even if your lease happens to be shorter than a year, they can only ask for one in a year. Now, the vast majority of leases in Quebec are 12-month leases that come up for renewal on July 1st. The landlord has to ask between 3 and 6 months. The notice has to be sent between 3 and 6 months before. So what does that mean? If you've got a 12-month lease coming up for renewal July 1st, we're right in the middle of the rent increase period because it runs from January 1st to March 31st. So many of you will have received notices, but if you haven't, Unfortunately for you, you still have, a couple of weeks that the landlord could send it. There's no maximum to what a landlord can ask. But as we will see, if you contest your increase, then there is a maximum to what they would get if you actually, refuse it. And we're going to explain how that works in just a moment. So how does it work? You get a rent increase notice. You've got 1 month to respond, okay? And if you are going to respond, you should be sending your answer by a secure method like registered mail, so that landlord can't say, well, I never got your answer. Now, what are your options as a tenant? You've got 3 options. You can accept the increase, whatever the landlord has asked for. You can refuse and put an end to your lease. Say, well, I don't want the increase, and also I don't want to stay in my apartment. Or you can refuse, but stay in your apartment. So you can say, I don't accept this increase, I refuse this increase, but I want to renew my lease. Okay, and the landlord then has 1 month to file at the rental board. Looking at the scenario where you've refused and said, I want to stay in my apartment, landlord has 1 month to file at the rental board. You don't have to do anything at that point. The whole burden is on the landlord. But one thing to point out is if you do nothing, if you just don't answer, you will be stuck with the rent increase that the landlord has asked for. And as I mentioned, there's no legal limit to what they can ask for. And if you don't answer, you will be stuck with that. So can we now do Brendan, the little screen share, which will help to give you some idea of what the rental board, based on averages of landlords' costs, what you could expect if you refused and if the case went to the rental board. Now, this table takes maybe a couple of minutes to understand, but Brendan has very kindly put the link to the document where this table is found on the website of the Tribunal Administratif du Logement, which we usually just call the rental board. That was its old name when it was the Régie du Logement. So it gives you an idea of the increase you can expect. And again, there's a lot of examples here and a lot of scenarios. But for example, an unheated dwelling, so that means heated by the tenant, it's 4%. However, if the landlord got, moving along the first row, the landlord got a 5% increase in their municipal tax, it would be 4.6%. So this table is really only a starting point. It gives you some idea. Sometimes the answer will be obvious. If you have an unheated dwelling and the landlord has done no renovations or anything, and the landlord's asking for 10%, you can be pretty confident the landlord won't get it. But to really know what the situation is, the landlord has to share more information with you, because this is based on averages. The landlord may have had a large increase in their insurance. They may have a larger than average increase in their taxes, and so on. So this is really just a starting point. And to go beyond that, you have to the landlord has to play ball and provide you with much more information. And there's a specific form that the rental board provides to landlords where they put in all that information, their taxes, their insurance, maintenance, and so on, and gives you what the rental board would calculate as the increase. If they give you that form, then you have all the information. If they don't give you that form, then it's kind of just a rule of, a rule of thumb. Again, the example, if you have an unheated dwelling and there's been no work done, and so the table there shows 4%, and the landlord's asking for 10 or 15%, well, then you know that the landlord is probably not going to get it, even if they don't share any further information. Actually, we could end the share now, Brendan. So why is it important to exercise your rights? So to give you an idea, last year in Quebec, so these are based on figures that, for our last year, so they're well established, the average rent increase in Quebec was 10%. Okay, and that includes people who went to the rental board, who didn't go to the rental board. It was 10%. But for the rents that were set by the rental board, people who actually refused and the landlord went to the rental board, I'm using rental board as shorthand for Tribunal Administratif du Logement, the average increase was 4%. So it was 2.5 times more for on average for people who actually, that more actually, because that even includes some people who went to the rental board, but at least 2.5 times more for people who didn't go to the rental board, who didn't contest their rent, than for people who actually refused. So that's why it's very important to know your rights and to exercise them. Now, Ruth, do I have any time left? Yes, I do. A minute or two? 4? Okay. Then I'm going to talk. That was faster
Yeah,
than I
about 4
thought.
minutes, Rick. I'm sorry.
Okay. So I'm going to just continue. First, I'm just going to mention finishing with the renewal of the lease. If you do want to move out, so you've decided that you want to move out, you have to be careful because one protection in Quebec, but it's kind of a double-edged sword if you don't know about it, is there's automatic lease renewal. This is a very good protection because it means if nothing happens, you don't have any eviction action taken against you, your lease is automatically renewed. But if you don't know that, and you get your rent increase notice, or you don't even get a rent increase notice, you just don't do anything, you don't communicate with the landlord in any way, and you think, oh, my lease is coming up for renewal July 1st, I'll move out June 30th. Actually, you'll be stuck with your lease being renewed, and you'll be obligated for another year. So if you do want to move out, then you either, in the month after getting a rent increase notice, you send a landlord a registered letter saying, I'm moving. Or if you don't get any notice, because sometimes it happens, landlords don't ask for a rent increase, you must make sure you respect this deadline of March 31st. If your lease comes up for renewal on July 1st, you must make sure you respect that deadline and send the landlord a registered letter saying that you want to move out. Now, just very quickly, in terms of renovations, just because it's a complicated area, a lot of people don't, know their rights here. If the landlord is asking for renovations, if the landlord is there's some renovations that can be done while the tenant lives there, but if any period of vacancy, when you have to move out, is involved, you have 10 days to respond. And if you don't respond, you're deemed to have refused, and the landlord has to take the case to the rental board and prove everything about their work. They have the permits, they have the financing, they have the plans, they really intend to do it. The landlord just very quickly has to offer you compensation for the period that you're outside of your apartment, which usually means you're moving costs back and forth, and the difference in your rent between your temporary apartment for whatever, 3-4 months, and your actual apartment where you've been living. And very important, you have the right to move back in afterwards at the same rent. However, depending on the importance of the work, at the next rent renewal, there might be an important increase. Do I have 1 more minute, or should we leave it at that? 1 more?
1.
Okay, so this brings us to the term renovictions. This is not a legal term. It doesn't exist in the law. But what does it mean usually? It means a landlord has asked for renovations, has asked you to leave for 3-4 months. They're willing to offer you compensation, as they're required to do, for your move out, your move back, your difference in rent. But it's just too much for people to have 2 moves in 3-4 months, to find a temporary place, and to know that in a couple of months, the next lease renewal, they may face a large increase. So indirectly, a landlord might be able to persuade you to leave, even though you have the right to come back. That's usually what's meant by renovictions, but the tenant does have the right to move back. If you want to move back to your apartment and you're willing to accept the rent increase based on the amount of work that the landlord did, that is absolutely your right. So I'll end it there. And if there are questions, I'll be happy to field them later.
Thank you, Rick. I know that was rushing you through a very important topic and a lot of information. As Rick said, put your questions in the chat box and he'll be pleased to answer them after. So moving right along, another friend of Seniors Action Quebec who has graced us with her expertise in the past. And she's even donating, giving us time today on a very special day for her personally. So I double thank you, Kate, and happy birthday. I'm letting the secret out. And without too much ado, very briefly, a few lines about Kate. She's been working as a private social worker. She's the director of a company called GERONTOLOGIS. This company specializes in providing consulting services to assist seniors to find appropriate housing and care services in private seniors residences. Before that, she worked as a project manager for Group CDH and has successfully developed 8 community-run housing projects in the West Island of Montreal. She was a city councillor for Beaconsfield for a 4-year term, and that gave her the insight of community needs and the way to address them effectively, especially if you're dealing with a municipality. I first met Kate through her role as the founding member of Villa Beaurepaire, a nonprofit seniors residence located in Beaconsfield. She's continued her involvement with that residence as a board member for 16 years and as president, and dedication to the well-being of seniors in the community. As a founding member of the Territoire de Quartier Sud-Ouest des Îles Housing Committee, Kate has been working to address the housing challenges in the area. Kate's belief is in the importance of affordable and accessible housing as a basic necessity, reflects her advocacy for vulnerable populations. Her dedication in creating such housing solutions demonstrates her commitment to social justice. I'm losing my voice. Kate, thank you very much. And I'm going to turn it right over to you. You're going to tell us a little bit about roles of government, municipalities, and what community can do to play the role they can play to develop social housing projects and moving forward. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ruth. I feel like you know more about me than I do. Thank you for the invitation to speak again today. I'm going to speak about our role as community members in building social housing. But before I get to that and some of the challenge, I'm going to talk to you about some of the challenges we've had at Villa Beaurepaire. So yes, Villa Beaurepaire finished our construction about 10 years ago, but we started this journey probably about 16 years ago or so. And I came to it as my last project working for Group CDH, which is a GRT, a Group de Ressources Techniques. I came to that project as a project coordinator and shortly after left there to start my business, GERONTOLOGIS, but stayed on as a volunteer. And as you can see, it's right behind me. That's Villa Beaurepaire. It's on Fieldfair Avenue in Beaconsfield, right beside the church. Oh, over there. There's a church there. And the church actually sold us the land. We developed a nonprofit. The steering committee came out of that church, actually. And with the steering committee of the trustees of the church and some community members, we built a 50-unit nonprofit autonomous residence for seniors. So we're an accredited residence category 1, actually. We have no services. We have no home care services. We are, everyone needs to be autonomous. It was developed under a program called Éducaloi, which a lot of you probably know about. It's a successful project after 10 years. It's a thriving community. It's, I mean, I take my hat off to the program Éducaloi and the SHQ to get that funding. It was incredible. I think I realized how lucky we were to get the funding because the program Éducaloi does not exist anymore. It was replaced by another program, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. So because of our success, we wanted to expand. And so we put in an application to buy that church next door to put in assisted living because as you probably know, and we've all been talking about the future of affordable housing for seniors in Quebec and Canada. Assisted living is quite expensive. And in my business, GERONTOLOGIS, I see the reality of the costs of private assisted living in Montreal, and especially since the post-pandemic, the price increases are they're just incredible. They're unaffordable for most of the population. So I wanted to build a nonprofit assisted living building next door. So we apply. So the Éducaloi project, the program funding has disappeared, and it was replaced by a program called the FAQ, the PHAQ, the Programme Habitation Abordable Québec. I think that's what it stands for. We applied for that program for funding in around the fall last year, and we crossed our fingers that we would get the funding. We had made a conditional offer with the church, conditional on getting the funding. On December 20th, approximately, we found out on the website, we didn't even get a call or an email or anything, but we just happened to look at the website and we didn't get the funding. It was a big disappointment. And it was even more disappointing. I know this talk is supposed to be the future of affordable housing in Quebec, but it's quite disappointing after all that work we put into it that we didn't get the funding. Because the land was then put on the open market. In the meantime, we thought we still have time, so we applied to the FTQ to get some funding. And with that funding, if we had acquired that funding from the FTQ, we would have got some partnership funding from the CMHC. I found out yesterday morning that the land was sold. So our quest for funding is useless. The good thing is that it was sold to another nonprofit, but it's not housing, it's for office use. And I'm hoping that maybe one day in the future, we can partner with that nonprofit and maybe purchase the land from them in the future and maybe build up, who knows, it's a zoning issue. But the reality is that was the only spot that we could build less than 50 units because we were going to share infrastructure, an elevator and a commercial kitchen. So it's kind of a disappointing stage of life for Beaurepaire right now. I looked at the numbers of units that were dispersed from the funding offered by the FAQ, and 999 units were allocated for the whole province of Quebec. The GRTs alone, the Groupe de Ressources Techniques, they submitted in the province of Quebec around 7,000 units. So imagine 1,000 were given out and 7,000 were applied for. And of those 7,000, a minority were given out on the island of Montreal. So I think maybe like 250 units. The rest went to the rest of the province. So clearly 1,000 units was not nearly enough units to give out for affordable housing. And I know we were competing with other projects that were farther along. So this is the challenge. We didn't get the funding because we didn't own the land, and we can't buy the land because we don't have the funding. So it's kind of a vicious circle, and we're going round and round. Other projects that had applied in the past, perhaps, and had received their land some other way and were farther along, or maybe a better risk, and they received the funding. But still, we're back to square one. How can we change this? I guess that's the challenge. Clearly, the funding is a major stumbling block for building affordable housing anywhere, and the funding to buy the land. So if you don't have the funding in the beginning, then the land is very crucial, obviously. So municipalities play a big role in land purchase and land availability. So I think keeping in touch with our municipalities, encouraging them to donate land, do a land swap, repurpose land is a good start. I know that in Dorval, for example, most recently, the city of Dorval transferred land from their own city-owned property that they've owned since the 80s, and they've transferred it to the OMHM. And in Dorval, they're going to build, they got approved for funding by the OMHM to build 100 affordable units for seniors in Dorval. So they were so lucky to get the land, and then they got the funding afterwards. The other challenge is that funding is not as predictable as it used to be. Back when I was developing nonprofit housing in the late 80s and 90s, we had secure funding from the federal government, from the CMHC, as well as from the provincial. And the type of funding was different back then too. We had capital funding, and we also had operating funding. So we had funding for rent subsidies. The FACT program doesn't have rent subsidies, it's just for capital funding. The co-investment fund from the CMHC does not provide rental subsidies, like we have with the Accès La Chute project. So Villa Beaurepaire has 50%, so 25 of our 50 units are rent geared to income, which is awesome. So it's the unpredictability, which is quite challenging. It's hard for GRTs, it's hard for community groups to know when to get ready to apply for funding. We don't know when the call for applications are going to come out and how many units are going to be given out. So I think we have to continue to lobby our provincial government and our federal government. We need to share our stories, share our struggles, to make them more aware of the need for affordable housing in Quebec, in Montreal, in the West Island. I'm intrigued by what Jacques said, and you as well, Ruth, about Minister Bélanger saying the future for senior housing is in the nonprofit sector. Well, that wasn't the case for us. I don't sound bitter. I hope I don't sound bitter, but I'm really still very disappointed. It was only yesterday we found out that we didn't get the church. I mean, we could never get the church. Yeah, it's sold. I look forward to learning how that statement made by Minister Bélanger could really come to fruition in areas like the West Island or in Quebec. And I'll certainly continue to lobby our levels of government and share our stories to try and get more units available in the future for affordable housing. So.
Kate, I'm so sorry. I thank you very much. I'm not as heartbroken as you because I didn't put the work or effort, but I knew it was going to be such a bonus if you had been able to pull it off. So I feel for you. And I think what I take out of your presentation is we have to have a strong voice. We have to get organized. We have to bring it down to the bread and butter issues and make the decision makers realize that this could be their aunt, their grandmother, their mom, somehow get through to them. So no doubt there's work that still has to be done. And I thank you for your comments. And so you don't need to hear from me anymore. I'm going to turn it over for now to Andrew, Seniors Action Quebec Policy Director. And Andrew is going to coordinate the question and answer period. So I hope people have put questions down in the chat box. And just trying to find out the time. We're 2:50. Let's say we go to 3. Andrew, if unless you tell me there's really some serious important questions, and then I'll take it back, and then we'll do a bit of a wrap up.
Perfect. There's always serious, important questions, and I just want to take this time to say thank you to everyone first for their
that we didn't get to.
Thank you for your time and your expertise. This was a wonderful webinar. I learned so much. Just questions that were sent to me privately and in the chat, and I have a list of questions that I'll try to go through quickly. One of the first questions I want to ask is there's a lot of talk about affordability and pricing. So Matt, this will go to you. Do you know what the average price is in an RPA? In a private residence, what does it cost people to go there?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and I have to give you not a black and white answer because there's so much that goes into costing. What I will say, for comparison's sake, the maximum you will pay in a public CHSLD today is $2,142. Okay, that's the rate in the public rate. And there are means and methods. If you can't even afford to pay that, then you could apply for subsidies. In an RPA, it's going to range all over the place, but here's why. There are 3 primary contributing factors. One is the actual size of the room. Is it a studio? Is it a 1-bedroom? Is it a 2-bedroom? On average, every room you increase, you're adding about $600 to $700, even $800 more a month by going up those extra rooms. Next big cost are meals. You're looking at anywhere from $400 to $500 per meal per day. And the biggest contributing factor in the difference is care services. And they could range from basic things to dressing, bathing, undressing, other services like housekeeping and parking, indoor parking. And so this is why we're all over the place with costing. However, I will say for a standard 1-bedroom, and I'm using Greater Montreal numbers, okay? I can't speak for Quebec and the regions, but one standard 1-bedroom without a meal, you're probably going to be anywhere from $1,800 to $2,800 for a one-bedroom RPA apartment.
And then you start adding on the extra costs for meals and services afterwards. Okay. So the costs add up pretty quickly is in a private residency.
They can add up quickly, is right.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I'm gonna go over to Jim quickly because I feel like he hasn't spoken in a while, so I want to make sure that he gets a chance to say something. You talked about the street count that is run. Do you guys collect demographics on that, or is that even possible to collect demographics on that in terms of age ranges and how many seniors are living as homeless or youth or?
Absolutely. It isn't just a straight up count, or are you homeless or are you not? There's actually a questionnaire that's carried out, which helps us get an idea of provenance, where people are coming from in their view, why they are homeless. I mentioned before some of those reasons. And there is average age. Average age is 48 years old, and going up. By the way, it's going up every street count. It gets older, interestingly. So yeah, so there's a really a beautiful array of data, but these counts are only done every 3 or 4 years. Some cities have something called coordinated access, where you get every day you can update your numbers, in particular the number of new people coming in and the people who've left, because it's a flow homelessness, right? People coming in, people leaving, and to capture the flow once every 4 years is not very good. So some cities do that much better than ours. And there's no city in Quebec that actually does coordinated access for a bunch of reasons, but hopefully it's coming, and it'll be incredibly helpful to us to have that granularity that we need. Perfect.
Great. Is that data accessible anywhere to find the demographics from a street count? Or?
Absolutely. So it was carried out by the provincial government's health department. Each one of, I think it was 13 different CUs, CUSs or CISs, the health agencies in every area were responsible for it. And so there's by administrative region and by across the province as well. So I could maybe during the next question I'll try to dig up the link and put it in the chat.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. My next question is for Rick. Someone had a question: if they refuse the rent increase with the landlord must go to the TAL. If they do not go to refuse at the TAL, does the tenant still have to go to the TAL, or is the case closed after that?
That's a wonderful situation. If you refuse and the landlord doesn't do anything, you have no increase. You don't have to do anything. Once you've refused, you don't have to lift a finger as a tenant. Now, you could negotiate and so on, but you don't have to do anything. The entire burden is on the landlord to file at the TAL, to prove to the TAL that their increase is justified. And if they don't file at the TAL, your lease is renewed at the old rent.
Okay, and just a follow up to the process. I've always heard often there's long wait periods to get to the tribunal. So what happens if, in the event that the landlord asks for an increase, you want to fight it, they go through the process, but you're not gonna hear from the tribunal for 6 months or 8 months? Mm-hmm. Are you you stay in place until then, or what happens? Absolutely, you pay your old rent. But you will, assuming there's some increase, you will have to pay the retroactivity. So if you, let's say, only comes up in December and your lease came up for renewal in July, so 6 months have passed, you're hit with a $20 increase, you will owe the retroactivity $20 times the 6 months. Okay, right. Thank you.
Great.
This next question I'm going to kind of go for both Jacques and Kate, because you both work in the kind of the same sphere here. You talked about how Madame Bélanger is talking about nonprofits being the future for affordable housing for seniors. But Kate, you just talked about the experience you went through and how difficult it was for you to get land or units. So how complicated is the process for nonprofits to acquire old buildings or land or funding to buy something like that? If it's the future, should they simplify the process? Is it very complicated right now? Does it look like it's changing? Anything along those lines? So Jacques, you can go first. You haven't spoken in a while, and then we'll go over to Kate.
So right now it's complicated. The whole process is complicated. Programs are complicated too. I've been involved in the sector for only 9 years, but some others told me that at the beginning of the Éducaloi program, it was really easier to develop, but with the passage of years, the program has been more complicated, underfunded also. So that's a reason why it took 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years for community groups with the help of the GRT to develop and realize their projects. And it seems to be as complicated with the new program, the fact. Just want to add, well, Kate spoke about the Appel de Projet that was launched last fall, from which 1,000 units were announced in December. And unfortunately, your project was not accepted. But last week, they announced 2,500 more units from projects that have been presented in the same call for projects in the fact. So I'm voluntarily involved in a nonprofit for seniors in Saint-Julie, Villa de l'Amitié, and we submit a project for redevelopment. And we were thinking that we have been refused because we were not in the list that was made public in December. But last week we got a letter from la SHQ and they accepted our projects. So it's a small project of 40 units, but well, c'est un parcours du combattant to develop a project.
Yeah,
Okay,
so
thank you.
well, congratulations, Jacques, that you got the funding for your project. That's incredible. And maybe we would have been on that list for the additional units, but it's too late for us now. And I think that's probably the case for a lot of projects. Villa Beaurepaire, our original project, it took us 3 times, so 3 years in a row, and on our 3rd time, we finally got the units. It is why do GRTs exist in Canada? They exist because the programs are so complicated to apply for. I mean, it's not everyone who can come together. First of all, you have to get architects and land surveyors and, have to get environmental studies and all those kind of things. It's not everyone who has that background. So if it's a community group, let's say an arthritis association, unless you've got architects and urban planners and all those people who are volunteers, it's pretty damn hard to make an application to the government. So that's why GRTs exist. And GRTs have been in Quebec, I think, for a good 40 years, 45 years. And they're across Canada, by the way. I don't know if there's more in Quebec than anywhere else, but the projects are complicated. I mean, when we were putting together our project, there's ratios of residential and non-residential. We couldn't miss commercial. Like always, we had so many creative ideas. We wanted to keep the daycare in the church. We were thinking of having commercial, and the commercial would subsidize like a condo purchase or sale to another nonprofit would help to subsidize our construction costs, but you can't do that. It's very restricted. So you kind of have to think out the box, and I think outside the box. And I think that's where it has to go with community groups. The community group that bought the church had a very large donor. And I mean, if we'd had a donor, then maybe we would have been able to make a down payment on that land and then purchase it and hold on to it until we got the funding. So I think we need to think outside the box and get private funding mixed in with public funding, at least private funding to get started, to get the ball rolling, which is getting a hold of the land.
Thank you. Ruth, it's 3 o'clock already, and I can go on asking them questions for the next hour, but I wanna save everybody the afternoon. So
Well, what, do you have one that you would really like to present?
um
And
I guess this would be for Matt, and you talked briefly about the new Maison des Aînés. And what's happening with that is the federal government contributing to that? Are these being put in place to replace the existing infrastructure or add on to the existing infrastructure, in which case we get more spots, or are we just going to update the current spots?
Right, combination of both for brand new construction and also existing CHSLDs, for example, where they're doing some renovations. So it is a combination of both. To answer the federal bit, you know, Mr. Legault has clearly stated this is provincial jurisdiction, and no one's going to tell us how to run our provincially run nursing homes. So when it comes to funding, this is where it comes with the federal transfers. So there's lobbying going with the provincial government trying to get more money from the federal government. But it is provincially legislated. I will add, though, that the federal government has taken a proactive role in terms of creating national standards, which I'm all for. You know, they can still create these national standards. The provinces don't have to necessarily abide by them, but that's one way of the federal government contributing to national standards, which was a direct result of the pandemic and the horror stories that we heard.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Andrew, thank you. You did a marvelous job with that. I have one more presenter briefly, but just a few comments. Kate, keep on the good fight. Keep us posted of what's happening. Jacques, the même chose. Jim, I congratulate you on your recent bit of good news and good financing from the Reed Family Foundation. And I'm looking forward to that. That's going to give you a good shot to be able to develop some of the things to address your needs. Richard, what can I do? Because this is the last webinar for this fiscal year for me. Richard, thank you once again. Tremendous information. And if you know of anything, of course, you're going to ship it our way. Matt, once again, thank you. And any plugging you can do on Life Unrehearsed, that would be beneficial for us. And great minds think alike. I think it was Katia that put a note in the chat box. For those who want to know what Seniors Action Quebec is up to and some of our upcoming activities and events, if you go on our website and sign up for our newsletter, because that's a requirement. I have lists galore of names and emails, but I cannot send you just like that. You have to consent to it and request it, and then we'll put you on the mailing list. And so for the last couple of minutes, I'd like to turn it over to Andrew, the policy director, who is going to say a few words on behalf of Seniors Action Quebec and our president, Walter, who unfortunately couldn't be here today because of an unexpected appointment. So Andrew, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Ruth. So as Ruth mentioned before, with funding from the Secrétariat aux Relations avec les Québécois d'expression anglaise, Seniors Action Quebec has spent the past year hosting 8 webinars on various housing topics. Now, these webinars were designed to shed light on the various housing issues that are impacting seniors, with a focus on English-speaking seniors as well. It began with a review on the current housing status, then went to a discussion on various housing options for seniors. Then we heard some creative housing solutions. The webinars also provided insight on the critical importance of housing on the health of seniors and how poor housing can lead to negative health outcomes. Today, our final webinars were organized to move the conversation forward and to ensure it continued, to ensure the conversation is continued, especially when it comes to seniors. So everybody knows Canada is in the midst of a housing crisis. From several of our presenters, we heard that there was a shortage of housing and a severe shortage of planned projects being undertaken to address said shortage. In short, we are in a crisis that is not adequately being addressed. While much of the media attention is focused on younger generations and their inability to afford homes, not enough attention at times is being given to the issues seniors are having finding affordable living or remaining in their house. As we should recall, some of the issues that emerged from the COVID-19 pandemic demonstrate that seniors can find themselves in precarious living situations, which can lead to extremely negative consequences. More so than the examples of the CHSLDs, reports continue to surface of issues seniors are having with their housing, from cost to living conditions. Seniors are vulnerable and they are a growing demographic. So in Seniors Action Quebec, we'll continue to work with policymakers, partners, the community, researchers, and whoever else to ensure seniors' housings are addressed. The housing crisis does not discriminate between English and French. However, many of the solutions being put forward are not taking into account the different realities for English and French-speaking seniors. As guest speakers from our webinars have informed us, proper living conditions are critical for the health and well-being. It will be our job to work alongside everybody to ensure that the realities of English-speaking seniors are well documented and understood, to ensure that outcomes continue to improve. So thank you very much, Ruth. Thank you very much for our many presenters over the past several weeks, months. And over to you, Ruth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And just to remind everybody that this recording will be made available to you in approximately a week's time, along with the two presentations that were shown today. And there will be a survey that you will receive. We ask each of you to take 2-3 minutes and fill it out and send it, because that's data and stats that we need for our funders. I thank everybody for their interest. If you want to be on the mailing list, you know how to do that. And look on the website for Seniors Action Quebec upcoming events, because Katia is organizing a couple of very important webinars that are coming up for the month of March. And then our next fiscal year after March 31st, we'll see what action and what direction we go into. So Katia, thank you for all your support, all the presenters for agreeing to come on, and for all the people who signed up and had an interest and stuck with us. I appreciate it. And have a great afternoon, what's left of it. And it's a nice mild day, so maybe everybody wants to go out for a walk or take the pup out. Thank you.